Here we go with recording. So I am Donna Elkins, and I am going to introduce our panelists because I see that we have some brand new faculty who are here with us, which is great, and some semi-new faculty who joined, I think, last year and maybe didn't have a chance to connect with people the same. So I want to make sure that I introduce everybody. But please feel free when those of you who are on the panel, when you speak, if you want to share anything else about yourself or your experience, feel free to do that. I'm just going to give the overview. And these are in no particular order. I noticed when I added to the panel list, I didn't do it in alphabetical order or order by school or any, it was just sort of a hodgepodge of how I added you. So I don't want anybody to feel offended or slighted by that, because it was just random, truly random. But on the panel today, we have Dr. Allison Fowler, who is an assistant professor in the School of Professional Psychology. Great to have Allison. Dr. Robin Hinkle, who is the director of our Masters of Science in Business Education, and she's an associate professor. We have Stacy Deck, Dr. Stacy Deck, who is director of undergraduate education in the School of Social Work and associate professor in the School of Social Work. We have Dr. Lisa Potts, who is an assistant professor in natural science, but he also is in our occupational therapy program. And then we have Dr. DeDe Wohlfarth, who is an icon professor in the School of Professional Psychology, and she is director of our program there. And then Dr. Jeff Lederer, who is a professor in the School of Occupational Therapy. So I think you can see that we have people from undergraduate and graduate education. I think we span the gamut, and that's one of the things that we wanted to do when we put it all together. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody because I'm really hearing some feedback. And then panelists, you could, of course, feel free to unmute yourself and anybody else, but I was just getting some feedback, so I wanted to make sure that everyone could hear. So what I'm going to do, we've looked at some pre-questions. I developed some questions that we looked at and the panelists are going to address, but I want to mention to you that we will have time for your questions, and please feel free to jump in with a question if something comes up as people are talking. We really do want this to be a conversation. And so what I'm going to do is ask the question, and then I will post it in the chat, just so you can see the question as we're going forward. And then I'll just ask our panelists to kind of chime in, those who wanted to address each of these questions. So our first question is, what new strategy did you try in your online courses over the past year that you thought really worked well for students?
Okay, I'll go. Robin, you go, and then I'll go.
Okay, one of the things that I started doing is using the Writing Center and embedding it into the class. Instead of my students just getting the echo chamber all the time of just, my feedback all the time. And so by doing this and making it required, previously I had done it and just suggested it to students and encouraged them, and maybe strongly encouraged for some students. But this time I actually assign points to it. I mean, if there's not any points, they just won't do it, I think. Or the ones who really need to do it won't do it. So that, I think, getting feedback from someone else, I think, just kept them from thinking that, I'm the end all be all of how they should be writing. And so it was just good to get a diversity of feedback.
If I may, I'm going to share my screen because I think it's easier to show you than to tell you. Can you all see this? Okay. This is actually not something new. It's something that I have done in the face-to-face classroom. It's an exercise that has a series of rounds and moves from multiple choice and true-false questions into short answer questions into longer application questions or case studies. And in my practicum seminar, we were working on the plan change process. And instead of me doing all the talking and being in the classroom the whole time, what I did was put them in breakout rooms for the entire class. And they had these instructions in front of them. All I did during the class was to keep time. And I would go in on the announcements that they could see in their breakout rooms and say, okay, it's time to move to the next round. So they, you know, I used the quiz feature in Canvas to let them take a quiz with open answers, and then what they couldn't figure out, they could ask one another. They evaluated and added to each other's answers in the next 2 rounds. And then at the end, there was a self-evaluation that was built into Canvas. What my students said at the end of class was it felt like this was a remote class where we were doing real time online through Zoom. They said it felt to them like the closest they had experienced to a live class. And it felt weird to me because for the entire class period, I was just keeping time. All of my work was done in planning the learning experience for them. It didn't require me to be in those breakout rooms at all. So it was really flipping the notion of what my role is as a teacher.
I'll jump in here. I taught face-to-face for a lot of years in the OT program, and I remember, DeDe, when you would talk at the assemblies and about online teaching, and I went, really, online teaching? I don't know about that. How is this going to work, and so on. So I kind of believed in it, you know, and it's like, all right. So what I've done in my online class, I've been doing about 5 years now. I try to simulate what I did in the classroom online. That's my style. And one of the things that I came to a understanding of was discussion posts. I did not want to be the person who, you know, a student spends time on a post and then it's good job, good work, excellent, or whatever. I wanted to move on beyond that. So what I've done in several classes, but the one I just recently taught, the students have 2 discussion posts. One is due Wednesday night and one is due Sunday night. For the posts that are due Wednesday night is I write the content, and then it's pretty traditional. I write the content, I write the post, and the students respond. If it's a large class, they're in groups. If it's a smaller class, it's just individualized. Typically, there are probably 4 to 5 groups and so on. Then what I do in each post is I ask the students for a question or 2 questions. What questions do you have about, really, it can be the content, it can be other things. If it's a large group, maybe what 2 questions does your group have about the content and so on. And I figured this was one way at an online distance to try to simulate being in the classroom, because, you know, all of us who are online, you really miss the immediacy of the classroom. And that took me a while to kind of come to terms with that, you know, because in the classroom discussions can go many directions and so on. Then what I do for the prompts that are due Sunday night is I assign a student to write the discussion prompt. And then I rotate the students. And so originally when I started to do that, it was like, all right, I'm going to turn it over to the students. How is this going to go? Honestly, it's gone really well. Students come up with questions that are, you know, qualitatively at times different from what I would ask. But what I'm also trying to do is give the students some power in the class and kind of get away from being so teacher-centered. And the feedback seems to be that students, you know, enjoy doing this, and it depends on the level that they're at right now. Or I'm sorry, last trimester I had a OT class, but I also had a class of post-professional students. It was a small class, it was 8 students. And what they decided to write about in their prompts was just amazing. It was really, you know, much different than I probably would have done. So I guess what I wanted to do is avoid the dreaded word busy work. That's just something that I didn't want to do. So that's kind of what I've done with the posts.
I love hearing all these ideas, and I'm already writing stuff down, and I'm just struck by all these ideas are so consistent with evidence-based practice. It's just wonderful because we have flipped classrooms, we have active learning, we have all that good stuff that makes the magic happen, peer-to-peer interaction. I mean, y'all are just master teachers, so I'm impressed. My idea seems real simple in comparison, but that's okay. I'm a simple person, so I'm just going to keep it simple. This was for a synchronous class, and I totally slashed and burned how many points the tests were worth, and I totally jacked through the roof how many attendance and participation were worth. And guess what? I got tons of high attendance and participation that was off the rails, and I had less of a worry about how are they not going to cheat? How are they not going to, you know, all those other things that are difficult in an online environment were less issues because they just weren't getting that many points for the tests and the quizzes. So that's my big idea.
So before we move on to another question, I just want to check and see if anybody else on the panel or anybody else has a question or a follow-up. I was going to ask Stacy if you would be willing to share what you showed us on the screen and maybe give us, you know, if somebody's interested in doing this. I think I did something somewhat similar, but not quite. And so I'd love to see more about the process that you used with that. Okay, so our next question is, what have you practiced in synchronous online classes to engage students? Because I asked this question because I know for some of us, this last year was maybe the first time we tried teaching synchronously online. And so I would love to hear what you practiced that you think really engaged your students.
I can take this one. So a couple of things. I think I also used the breakout rooms, like you mentioned, Stacy, but I like your idea. I never was to a point where it was the entire class, so I was interested in seeing your plan as well. But I would use the breakout rooms and kind of have them like student teach some, but what I used within the breakout rooms and sometimes in the large group, just kind of depending on what it was, I use like Google Jamboards or some like, let's see what else on. There's Google Jamboards and like Google Pictures and Google Slides and some of those. And rather than just kind of asking like, what questions do you have, or let's talk about this or that, I would put them in groups and kind of like assign a topic, and maybe each group would create a slide, and then it would all be like this collaborative thing that they worked on together. Or if we did the Jamboard, I would have them maybe like make a mind map, and like each group was responsible for like a category or a topic on that mind map or something. And so it was kind of cool too to just be able to sit back and watch like all the cursors moving around on the screen, so you could see that they were you know, participating in that. And I think it seemed to be well received. They liked that and said that it, you know, helped them feel like they were engaged in doing things during the class.
I want to talk for a minute about the polling feature that's available in Zoom and Windstream. I use that quite a bit. And it's interesting because I think a lot of us struggled with what we were losing in moving out of the face-to-face classroom. And I noticed that this provided actually a gain. it's similar to using the clickers in the classroom, but not all of us have that, and it's so easy when you're in the online environment. You can start a class with just a check-in to see what they know, what they're struggling with. You can use it as a sort of a group quiz. And what I love about it is that there's anonymity as well. So if there are sensitive questions or questions that people might want to see the gestalt of the class in terms of where they are in a certain belief or value, you can look at the outcome for the class without having to self-disclose at the individual level. So again, I think students liked having the variety in the class and the opportunity to participate in different ways.
I'm technology challenged. I did do some like Kahoots and polls and, you know, small breakout groups and those things. Self-reflection for a few minutes, look up something in real time on your phone, you know what I mean? Because they all have their phones right there. I think one of my most successful things was hot topics, where I picked like super hot topics and related to the class content, and then they each had 5 minutes in small discussion groups, and it was timed and it moved along. How do we teach birth control, or how do we teach sex education to LGBTQ students that is culturally sensitive, and what age should that begin, and how much information should kids need? Bam! You know, 5-minute discussion on that related to adolescent development. And they loved those. They were like, ooh, we want to do more of those. So they were really engaged. So that was just in addition to some of the other fantastic ideas, something I did.
Yeah, I did something very similar to what DeDe is doing. When all the students are, you know, all the boxes show up and everyone's just sitting there waiting for something to happen. And so what I did is I also would start with, here is a topic, here's a question, we're just going to go around and people are going to answer it, you know, just to kind of kickstart the whole thing. And people, you know, getting people involved, getting people going, because that first part is always a little bit daunting. It's like, okay, here we are, go teacher, you know, we're waiting, we're looking. And so by turning the tables a little bit and saying, okay, here's the topic, here's the question, what do you guys have to say? And so I found that that worked pretty well. And then you can launch into, you know, what you want to do. I happened in the class in my class, where I used a lot of this, is each person, it was a small class. It was 8 people. Each person took turns being the discussion leader for the conversation. It was essentially leading a group conversation. Many of the students, these were post-professional students, but they were interested in becoming teachers. So I figured, you want to become a teacher? Go ahead and try it. This is your chance. I'll coach you if needed, but just turning it over to them. And so, you know, in this particular class, that worked. That probably wouldn't work in other kinds of classes, but for this, it worked pretty well. And students, the feedback I got from students is they just really enjoyed doing it and taking the lead and moving the teacher off to the side, I guess. And so that, yeah.
Again, talking about opportunities that, you know, the silver linings in the clouds of the last year. From a program perspective, because we moved to remote classes, we were able to consider adjunct faculty who lived far away. And we have a grassroots history of the US class in the School of Social Work that last year was taught by someone who lives in Mississippi and is doing some fantastic civil rights work there. Just a great role model for our students. So successful that although we're moving all of our classes back to the classroom this year, we're keeping that class remote because it's worth them having that opportunity. It just allowed us to broaden our horizons and think more expansively about who we could bring into the classroom.
Great ideas. Great ideas. And there, yeah, thanks for that comment, DeDe, that it, you know, surprisingly, it does give you the opportunity sometimes to move from being the teacher and the person who's on to, you know, letting the students take some lead. And I like some of the examples we've been hearing about that. So our next question, does anybody have anything else they want to share, or any questions or thoughts from anyone who's, feel free to post things in the chat too if you have questions that come to you as we're talking.
I think one thing, Donna, that just came to me, and this is a pretty simple thing, but for people who are new online, I think it's really useful to try to, what I try to do is record the lectures again. Even if I just taught the class, I'll record all the lectures again, because things change, events change, the whole vibe changes, of course, especially now. And I think I think students appreciate that they're not watching something that was recorded like a year and a half ago or something. So I think that's something for people who are rather new to online teaching. I think that's a good idea.
Great point. Yeah. Yeah, I found students always like when you can reference, current events or something that's happening, that's probably happening, in their lives right now. So that makes a big difference. So our next question is one that we've already sort of hit on, but I do want to give you the chance to see if there is, if you could recommend, this is the question, if you could recommend one technology tool, what would you recommend and why?
So I can take this one. I started using a tool called Perusal, and it's been so life-changing for engaging my students in discussion that I'm going to keep using it. I was teaching all online asynchronous courses this past year, and now I'm moving to majority face-to-face courses, but I'm going to keep using it because I think it's that good. So it is essentially a tool where professors can upload any kind of reading or video or even textbook, any kind of resource, and any place where you would normally try and engage students in a reading and discussion about that reading, this tool kind of just elevates that. So it's set up in a format that's very similar to a lot of social media platforms where students can sort of have a conversation style discussions with one another and with you. And the tool is called Perusal for the chat. So let's say I upload an article, and students and I can require them to make a certain amount of annotations, and of course they can be comments, questions, what have you. And I can have them make a certain amount. So let's say I want them to make 3. But a lot of things that we'll run into, especially with sort of typical discussion board posts, is you'll get sort of the, I totally agree, kind of response that's very surface level and no one's really saying anything. And I don't understand totally the magic science behind it, but Perusal recognizes those kinds of comments and they receive lower scores. And so it's helping also to sort of scaffold them into making better discussion questions, which is an issue that I see, even with graduate students, it's a hard skill to learn. And so this is awesome for that. But another thing that I love about it is so they're annotating the readings with their comments, but then they can tag me or tag another student and ask a question or respond to that student's comment. They can like posts. So it's very much that sort of social media kind of format with things. And they can get additional credit for creating a comment that gets a lot of sub comments or for liking one another's posts. And Perusal, I could talk about this for a while, so I'll be kind of brief, but you can email me if you want. Perusal also gives points for things like opening the reading in the first place. If you want, you don't have to give points for that, but you could at least track it. How long they've been on the reading, how many pages they're reading, things like that. So it's really amazing. And you can really tailor it to fit whatever you need. If you don't want them to have to do comments, you don't have to have them do comments. You can just make sure that they're actually doing the readings. So yeah, I absolutely love it. I'm going to keep using it.
And I will mention, we've had some questions in the chat. Perusal is available through Canvas. If it's not showing up on your left-hand list, if you go to Settings and navigation, you'll see that it's an external tool that's available to you. And so thank you, Allison. I'm so glad to hear that, because I know, Jeff, for instance, you had a question a while back about Perusal, and I was like, I haven't had a chance to try it out yet. So it's good, you know, we may have to have you come back and do a demo for us about using that tool. It'd be a great idea.
Yes. And somebody also said it being about ebooks and readings, and I mostly use it for that, but I've assigned videos on it as well, YouTube videos, and put my own lectures on it. So when I recorded my video lectures, I would put them on Perusal for the students to view and to annotate my lecture, pause it, make a question or comment. So it can be both, but yeah.
Excellent. Great. Yes, it sounds like, from what I'm seeing in the chat, that we have our next session determined. So we will be doing a Perusal session. Great. Lisa, I was going to ask you too, because I know you use a lot of different tools. You mentioned some before, so I wondered if there was anything you wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, mine, I guess, is probably basic compared to that. And a lot of people may already use, but I use Kahoot a lot. And if you haven't tried it, I think you should. I really like it. All the students like it. A lot of times they will ask me like, hey, are we going to do this today? Can we please do this? Can you make one for this? And so it's basically just, well, it actually has a lot of different features, and there's different levels, you know, that you can subscribe to it. But the free version, and what I mostly use it for, is just creating like a quick little quiz, and it's like a game. And so the students are very competitive most of the time, or the competitiveness comes out when we do this. And so we'll use it sometimes like in review sessions, just as a way for everyone to kind of see example questions and try to answer, but it's, you know, there's nothing attached to it. You can attach points to it if you want to, but the students are always really engaged in that. And the thing I like about it is, like, say it's going to be like time for review, or they've already, you know, done all these things, and I'll say, okay, well, questions do you have? How do you guys feel about this or that? And usually it's just crickets. But if I put my questions directly in the Kahoot, then I can see how well they're doing on that, you know, those particular questions that I have. And so a lot of times it's a good way, if nothing else, to even just kind of, for me to see how they're doing with certain things, and then an opportunity for that discussion. Because like, well, you guys didn't have questions about this, but clearly you missed the mark on this particular point. So what's going on? Why are you confused? Let's explain it. And then, you know, we can pull whatever it is up and actually talk about it more. So I like it too, because it kind of opens that door for additional discussion when sometimes they're scared to maybe just ask the question in front of everyone. So that's probably the main, I mean, like I said, if you haven't tried it, I would recommend it, because it can be pretty engaging, I think, for the students. And occasionally I will assign, you can either assign it or you can play it like live together, and we usually play it together live like that. But occasionally I will use it like for extra credit, either by assigning it and saying you have to get a score of at least this, then you can get one extra credit point on the exam or something. Or if we play live all together, the top 3, either groups or participants, will get extra credit points on the exam. So I think they like it when there's points attached to it too, because they're just more engaged and participating.
Yeah, and we've been thinking for a while that we might have Lisa do a demo for Kahoot. I know I've had it on my list for a while, and we, you know, since we went offline last year, we didn't get that done, but I think that would be helpful too. I know some of you may be more familiar with it, but if you have any other tools or ideas, feel free to either speak up or post them in the chat. And the things that we're talking about now don't have a specific license agreement or, you know, a cost requirement or anything like that. So these are things that are, you know, available for you to use.
Donna, I wanted to add too, and I'm gonna cross that line to license in a minute. But I want to start with Canvas has a feature in the studio where it will caption your videos for you. I think most people are aware of that, but if you're not, it is gold. And I notice a lot of people are making their own videos. It's super important for accessibility, but I notice I use captioning on my videos when I'm watching them, because then I can watch them at double speed. And take half as long to get through a video. And I think I even suggest to students that they do that, because you can listen faster than you can read. It is super easy to use and super accurate. I was amazed. On the licensing side, I am piloting. I offered to be a guinea pig. I saw a demo on something called Menti.io, and I'm going to put a link in the chat. It is an AI-driven discussion board, and my frustration with discussions, I think, is pretty common, that we tend to ask students, make one original post and reply to 2 other people. And then you get real shallow, you know, I agree kind of posts. So then we tell them, your original post should be 200 to 300 words and your replies should be at least, you know. And so then what they do is count words and count posts, and what we do is count words and count posts, and it's tedious for them to read and it's tedious for us to grade. And the conversations are not meaningful. Plus, that's not the way conversations work. We would never do that in the classroom. Everybody has to say something, and then we'll all try to pick somebody to respond to. So Menti.io is using some artificial intelligence to sort of mine what's happening in the discussion. And it gives you a dashboard where you can see all kinds of things, dynamics in the conversation, who's responding to whom. Are you only talking to one person versus engaging with a variety of people? Are you only agreeing versus offering a counterpoint? And all of those things that deepen and enrich in conversations, and enrich, not enrichen. The students also have a dashboard, so they can see some feedback on their own performance, as well as the performance of the learning community in getting to deep conversation. I say I'm crossing a line because there is a license fee for this. And I'm kind of hopeful that if I like it, other people might come on board, because the more people, then the lower the license fee is per person. But I saw it at EIB's remote conference, and it seemed worth trying and worth paying for. So stay tuned. I'll let you know.
Good. Good. So the next question that we're going to address is, and this is one that has come up because it may be a little different this year now that we're sort of moving back to more in-person experiences on campus. But for some of us who teach primarily online, and especially last year as we were teaching primarily online, we didn't have the chance to maybe meet students in person before being in the online environment with them. And so the question is, how have you built connection with students yourself as the teacher that you didn't know? And how have you done that in the online environment?
I'm not on the panel, but I'm happy to share something that I'm doing. Canvas makes it really easy for students to, in a video introduction forum, click reply and do a video post. So I am going to be having students in a new class, undergraduate course, do that with a brief introduction just to start that learning community. So within the first 48 hours of class by that Wednesday, they have to do a video introduction, very short, very low stakes kind of thing, but it does get that learning community started, and it gives you the visual by having the video component versus just the text-based introduction.
So Jana's idea is better than mine, but I go really low tech. I'll share my screen real quick. And I do have them upload the first 24 hours of class, my handy dandy student information form. And it just has, you know, oops, basic stuff on it. Can you, yeah, I got lost in my 52 tabs that are open.
Oh, I was gonna say, we are seeing it. We were seeing it.
Oh, you were? Oh, let me go
We
again then.
were.
Yeah, sorry, bad teaching. Anyway, so it just asks students a little bit about their backgrounds and a little bit about who they are, and that can be really helpful. You know, racial, ethnic, cultural background, interests and hobbies, current jobs. What are you most excited to learn? Accommodations. I often get students who haven't gone through the Office of Accommodations. They'll say something here, and then they'll have that, be able to talk with them. I'm going to have my first, and this is a face-to-face thing, emotionally support dog in a room. I've never taught with an emotional support dog in a room, so that came through this form. I'm just learning more about a student. And also, I think it's real important, I must just add, I have the pronoun, not preferred pronoun. It's real important to say pronoun. Can I use this pronoun in front of the class? Can I use that pronoun in front of other professors? So I think that's just a low tech, not as good as Jana's way to you know, find out a little bit more about students. The other thing I do that's so old school, and I'm gonna age myself here, but hey, this is the truth. I make a seating chart. Like, even in virtual asynchronous classes, I literally make little squares, put all the information about them, fake little chairs, so that I'll remember them and that they'll be real people. And I literally make a seating chart even in asynchronous classes. But it helps me to get to know them.
That is a great idea. I had not thought of that. And so I like that idea. Yeah, of doing it even in a asynchronous.
So I do a couple things that are kind of similar to what you mentioned, Jana. I do have like an introductory kind of about me like thing on the course page. I don't know whether or not they actually look at that. I would like to think they do, but I don't know. But I do always try to like have a welcome message and send them that link and say like, hey, here's the class, here's a little bit about me. But the one thing that I tried new this past year was to set up like a flip grid for the class. And I specifically asked them like to share something fun about yourself on the flip grid for everyone to see. So, you know, it wasn't like, you know, any kind of coursework assignment. It was just like, let's share things, some sort of fun fact about yourself. So that's one thing I've done. And another way we've done that too is we just have a collaborative document. Like in this class we're getting ready to start, same kind of thing, like just a quick fun fact that you want to put on there. So like on the first day we can look at that and see if there's any connections between people. So that I think gives us or me something to kind of see where I can connect people then too, but also between the students as well.
I think one thing I do, I try to get to know the students a little bit at the beginning of class, but all throughout the class when we're talking about things, I'm always am willing to share the blunders and the mistakes that I made as an OT. And from feedback, students really enjoy hearing the stories. I think oftentimes they view the teacher as infallible and just, you know, they never have done anything wrong. And for us to sort of humanize the fact that, you know, these are the mistakes that I made and I'll tell you all about them because some of them were not that good and so on. But I think that I guess from feedback that students seem to enjoy hearing those things. So I guess that's a way for them to get to know us more than they would normally.
Something that's real simple, I always give my students step-by-steps on how to add their photo and a description of themselves in Canvas. The photo makes a big difference. I also, especially in asynchronous classes, anytime there's a student question or they want to, you know, have a one-on-one, I encourage them to do it by video conference so that we can see one another face to face and I'm a human and they're a human. And And then on the more social side, something we tried in the school social work last year was we offered a film festival that was actually open to the whole campus, and we streamed some movies through Canvas, through Zoom, and then had a little discussion at the end. So it was like, everybody make your popcorn, come watch a movie with us.
Another low-tech thing I would encourage folks to do is if you don't have your pronouns after your name, to do that. It's easy to add in Zoom. I can't remember. You go to settings, preferences, name displayed, and you can add, somebody can do it right now and they can tell me exactly what to do because I don't remember. But it's super easy to add they or she or he or whatever you want to add. And it makes a really powerful statement that invites folks who may be transgender, maybe gender non-binary, to feel more comfortable with that. And it also just opens up a conversation, right? So if someone is popping in and trying it real quick, you can just jump in and tell me what to do. It's, I don't remember exactly. Your profile, preferences, as you display your name, you've all chosen your name, so you can just add the pronouns past your name. I guess adding to that, I think it's really important that we really work to crush imposter syndrome and to reach out to our students from marginalized backgrounds, whether that be through gender, whether that be through racial ethnic minority, whether that be LGBTQ, whatever it is, because students feel like they don't belong in spaces, both virtual and face-to-face, and we really want all students to feel welcome. So going out of your way to include invitations for students from marginalized backgrounds.
Just to build on what DeDe was saying about the picture makes a big difference, is also when, like during the lockdown, some of my students were really struggling out there. And they're like, can I call you? And I'm like, well, let's do a Zoom so I can see you. And so, I mean, that just seemed like a natural thing to do, and probably everybody's doing it, but it just, it just really helped to be able to see their face, and I guess for them to see mine, because, you know, I was having to do a lot of coaching, pulling out probably a lot of skills that you have, DeDe, that I don't have. I've just tried to pull them out. I mean, because some of my students were just really having meltdowns. So I think just doing that extra little Zoom instead of just the phone call helped a lot.
I think to build on what Robin, what you were just saying too, there's actually some research showing students, well, in psychology, they're more comfortable speaking through the technology face-to-face, the video, than maybe in person. That physical component in the same room can be a barrier versus through technology. So that's something to think about too as we transition back to in-person, is, are there certain things we do that have worked really, really well online through technology that maybe those components should continue because they have worked so well, and maybe they're more convenient for our students. Or whatnot, that maybe we just need to think more broadly than just black and white, in person or remote.
One of the things that I've started to do since teaching online is I typically did the similar strategies that we've all talked about, asking questions about the students, giving them an opportunity to share things about themselves, which of course is important. But I started to wonder about, like, can it be taxing to be sharing this personal information, and it's kind of like it's not going into an abyss, but you're maybe not actually hearing any kind of response from it. And so I've tried to be really just intentional about when a student is sharing anything vulnerable with me, I'm responding to that. So even if it's, what are your responsibilities outside of school? And they're saying, I work 25 hours a week. I'm responding to that and saying, that sounds like a lot, make sure that you remember to check in with me, or I'm going to check in with you, and actually responding to those shares that the students are, putting effort into doing. And then the other thing that I've been trying to do to sort of just foster that belonging in those online classes is we're missing out on those very brief little interactions with students that kind of build community of, somebody said something funny and we all kind of laugh, or, whatever it is that happens in class. And so in that discussion sort of tool that I was telling you all about, if a student says something funny, I write, ha, 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 ha. I will write that and respond to it and say, that made me laugh out loud, and share those kinds of things. And I think that that's important to let them know that you are understanding their personality, you're seeing them showing up, and you're interacting with
Hey, Donna, I know I'm not on the panel, but I just wanted to add that something that I tried last session was I do teach an online class for USM Oneino, and I required the students to meet with me weekly, one-on-one. And so I really felt like me getting in that space with them, just scheduling a meeting once a week with them to ask them if they had any questions, and just see what was going on. And that gave them another opportunity to kind of like introduce themselves and tell me things about them. And I really felt by the time that the course was over, I really knew a lot of these students, and I knew kind of like what life stuff was going on with them. So.
Great, thank you, Jessica. And if you haven't had a chance to meet Jessica yet, she is our new coordinator for the math lab. So students really need to have a connection with her, and she's going to be, you know, she's a great person to have that connection with. Thank you for sharing that. So I just have one more question, and I'm going to go ahead and pop it in here. And we've already talked about it maybe to a degree, but if you have anything else that you would like to add, panelists or anybody else, and then we'll just kind of open up the floor. Oops, I have to make sure I have the right thing copied to post in the discussion. This is the other thing I've noticed when you're, especially when you're teaching synchronously, is trying to do all these things at once and trying to keep straight what you're trying to do. But this is a question about how you address grading and feedback. And if you do that differently, and we've already had a couple allusions to this and some of the responses that people have given, but if you do anything differently with grading and feedback in your online, whether synchronous or asynchronous courses, than you do face-to-face.
I can share real quick what I did with my students in session 7, because I really struggled with how am I going to quiz them, and I wanted to actually ensure that the students were doing a lot of the work on their own. So during the weekly virtual meetings, I actually quizzed them during that time, and so we just went through a quiz, and if they needed help, I would help them, and I reduced some points. And so anyway, and they got their grade right there, like, so they knew, like, and I used a rubric, and it was the same rubric every time. And so I felt that that was really a great way for me to assess them and get to know, like, where they were struggling, areas that they were really strong in, and then kind of get them comfortable with using the math language and speaking that to me too. So I thought that worked for me.
Great. And I know we've already mentioned, I think a couple people at least have mentioned the idea of, you know, lowering the stakes on assignments and lowering the stakes on testing and other things when you can. Yeah.
Donna, one thing I do is a weekly reading review quiz. So it's, again, low stakes, and they can use their book, because I found that a lot of times they use their book anyway. So let's just put it out there, and you can use your book and reinforce the learning and so forth. So just kind of shifting that a little bit. And the other thing that has saved me is I've created scripts that I can use for feedback, but I plug in individual information. So I really like how you did, and then I plug in a few words from their discussion or from their paper or whatever. So I have scripts that expedite the grading, but are still very personal, so the students know that I'm reading their work.
Great. Yeah, and I know DeDe just mentioned in the chat that her feedback now is legibles because she can type it into Canvas. So if you are a typer, sometimes it's easier to write the feedback in, you know, in this format than it is to try to write as we used to on papers.
Yeah, I want to just echo Jana's point about, you know, some things work better online, and we need to be really thoughtful, I think, as a university in meeting the needs of the time, to think about how do we incorporate things that worked really, really well online, even as we can return to some face-to-face, or maybe, or who knows, but some things were better. So can we think really thoughtfully about building these amazing hybrid classes and amazing hybrid faculties that really take the best of online and combine it with the best of face-to-face? Holy moly, we're going to be amazing, instead of like just like, oh, return hardcore to face-to-face, forget all the stuff you learned online. That's not useful, and we really need to think about meaningfully integrating the things that worked into our work.
Yeah, one thing I like about, one thing related to grading that I like is in SpeedGrader, you can highlight the text, or you can use that little balloon icon. And so going through, you know, a paper and highlighting shows the students that you're actually reading. I mean, you know, we were actually reading the papers before, but I don't know that I've underlined stuff I was reading, you know, like I could with a highlighter. And so that gives the idea, you know, so obviously students while they're grading this, and so you can pull out the highlighters, you can make it different colors, you can pull out the balloons, you know, whatever you want to do, but it gives a measure of the students knowing that you're looking at their paper. And I also do what Janet does too. If I find a comment that I really like, I'll just keep it and then change some of the words, you know, as well.
I was just going to chime in, and especially based on what DeDe said and somewhat what Jeff just said. And I haven't used Canvas before, so I've been taking all of Ezra's courses. And one of them is not only can you do all the things that Jeff and DeDe just said, but you can voice feedback. And I'm really looking forward to that because I tend to give a lot of feedback. And I think it's very easy for students to misunderstand versus if they hear you say it and realize that it's a positive thing you're saying and not negative feedback.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's another good way to create connection with the students, because just hearing your voice is a way for them to connect with you.
Yeah, I was going to say I've used that like voice option in the SpeedGrader a few times, and it's actually something that I want to remind myself to use more often, because there's been times where I felt like maybe I was typing a lot in the comments or something, and I'm like, they're not going to, like, the tone's not going to come through. Let me try this. And there's been a couple of times too where
faster.
Yeah, and it's just faster. But there's been a couple of times too where I've got assignments where I'm like, I want you to show me what you've done and I'll give you feedback like that. And I've gone back and forth with students where they've kind of like screen captured some things that they're doing, sent it to me, and then I screen captured back my feedback. So that was another option that worked kind of nicely, because then same kind of thing, just adding the video component in there so I can say, you know, this is what I'm talking about while I'm giving them the feedback.
I've added video feedback to my asynchronous discussions. One thing I've noticed is that if I start getting involved in the discussion by actually typing into the discussion thread, I can inadvertently take over or shape the conversation in a way that it wouldn't if I weren't so present. So I've set up sort of the discussion begins at the beginning of the week and ends on Friday. And about midweek, I'll go in and make them a real short video to say, here's what I'm seeing happening in the discussion. Here's some things that I'm wondering about. Here's a place that maybe it could go deeper. I'm wondering about this. And then ask them to go back into the discussion board and add to what's there based on those observations. So I'm not typing into the discussion board at all, but I am giving them that signal that I am reading it and encouraging them to go deeper.
So it looks like we have just a little under 5 minutes left. If anybody has a last question or thought you want to share. Well, I hope today, and I've seen, as I mentioned, that there are several newer faculty in the session today, and so I'm so glad that you're here. And what you've been introduced to some of our really outstanding teaching at Spalding, and so hopefully this has given you a chance to see some faces and some names, so that if you have questions going forward, or if you want to check in with somebody about, you know, something that they talked about today, you'll know how to reach them. And I will just go ahead and say on their behalf that I know the faculty who are here, I know the faculty who are on this panel, and I know they would be willing to talk with you further if you have questions. And even some of the faculty who weren't on the panel who participated with us, I know they would be willing to sit down and share with you and talk with you about some of the specific things that they talked about today. You will be receiving later this afternoon an email from me that has the link to the recording of this session, And then we'll also have a link to an evaluation for the session. So I'll ask you to fill out that evaluation. It just takes probably 2 minutes at most to do that. And you can share with us, we've gotten some ideas today from the chat and the discussion for future sessions. But if you have any other suggestions or anything else that you would like for us to do this year that would be helpful for you, there's a place on that evaluation to share that. And so I will mention as well as the last thing that Lisa Potts is going to be, or is, the new chair of our Teaching Excellence Committee. Yay! And so the Teaching Excellence Committee, if you're not familiar, I know Stacy's on it and probably some other people who are here. I'm not looking at everybody right now, but it's a group of faculty that do help plan these sessions for you, but also just want to help elevate our teaching excellence at Spalding overall. So, you know, feel free to get in touch with Lisa if you have ideas too. So I just want to thank you for coming today, and thank you so much. And I will be in touch by email later this afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, thanks.